Hello everyone, it's Daniel, Modern Identity Lead from Formula 5. In this video, we'll learn more about token enrichment with custom claims, which is one of the features available in the Formula 5's External Identities Hub Architecture. If you are not familiar with External Identities Hub Architecture created by Formula 5, I strongly recommend watching the first video from this series, where I explain all the concepts and what is it? What's Formula 5's External Identities Hub Architecture? So, in this video specifically, we are going to focus on the Token Enrichment API, so this component in the solution architecture. So let's start. What is token enrichment? That's the first crucial question. With token enrichment, we can inject additional claims in the ID or access tokens that are issued to the applications once user is successfully authenticated. And values of those claims can be grabbed from CRM system, some external database, some external API, some external system, and so on. So it means that during user authentication, we are able to call external system and grab some data and include this data directly in the ID or access token returned to the application. To inject these claims, we need to prepare an API to handle calls from Microsoft Entra External ID for customers. So in this specific scenario, it's not only about, injecting those claims directly, but also we have to prepare the structure for this communication to make sure that, for instance, Entra can securely call the external API and then exchange the data in a specific format. There is also configuration required on the Microsoft Entra External ID side, which I will also explain today in this video. So basically, there are two parts of this solution. One is configuration on the Microsoft Entra External ID side, and on the other side, we have API that can be, connected with all other systems to grab the data. Okay, perfect. So let's explain this concept. So in Microsoft Entra External ID, it's called custom authentication extensions. So basically, with this approach, we can call external API endpoint. And how we host this API is up to our decision. Like, we can use Logic apps, we can use Azure Functions, we can use Azure Containers apps, Azure Web Apps. It doesn't matter, to be honest. It matters that this API has to be really responsive. And this API needs to be implemented in the correct way when it comes to data structure security, to make sure that we can securely and quickly exchange data between Microsoft Entra ID and this external API. So as we can see here on the Microsoft Entra ID side or Microsoft Entra External ID side, because this feature is available in both types of tenants, for workforce and for customers, we create something what is called event listener. So this event listener is responsible for triggering a call to external API during the user authentication. So once user is authenticating using Entra, this event listener is listening for this specific event. And once it detects that user is authenticating, then this custom authentication extension is calling API, external API, and obviously on the API side, we can call external system, we can grab some data from the external database, and then return this data in a specific JSON format to Microsoft Entra ID or Microsoft Entra External ID, so it can include this data in the resulting ID or access token. Okay, perfect. So when we look at the token here, we can see specifically that in this token, I have the claim that is called patient identifier. Okay? So it means that I grab this data from external system and I included this as a custom claim in this ID token. So there is no patient identifier claim by default in Microsoft Entra, correct? Like, this is a custom claim. And to include such custom claim in the ID or access token, we have to use custom authentication extensions or token enrichment API. So we will see this patient identifier in action when it comes to demo. But for now, the most important part is that to basically include any custom claims in the resulting ID or access tokens, we have to use custom authentication extensions, and we have to build some sort of custom API to grab this data from external systems or databases. Okay, what are the considerations for token enrichment API? So first of all, it's about the security. API must be secured properly using access token. So this communication between Microsoft Entra ID and token enrichment API is secured with access token. So it's not like anyone can just directly call this API endpoint to grab some data about the user using the user ID from Entra. We need access token for that. So first of all, access token is obtained by Entra, and then our token enrichment API is called. API must validate and handle incoming and outgoing HTTP requests and response schemas. So again, there is a specific schema or specific contract that is used to exchange data between Entra External ID or Entra ID and a token enrichment API. So the data has to be in a specific format, so in the end Entra can understand what claims were returned, and then Entra can include those claims in the resulting ID or access tokens. An API must have logging enabled to quickly resolve issues. That's super crucial because every time we depend on external system, it's good to also understand what's going on this external system side. So if we have issue with user authentication and there is some information displayed like we cannot sign you in right now, probably there is something going on with this communication to token enrichment API. So that's why logging is crucial here. And obviously API must be highly available to avoid disruption during user authentication. So it means that if Entra will wait too long for the response from the external API, it will basically return error. So user will not be able to successfully authenticate. So it's very important to build this token enrichment API having high availability in mind. So that's very crucial. Okay, perfect. So now it's time to see this whole concept in action. So let's see it. Okay, so here is Formula Health demo web application, and this application is secure with Microsoft Entra External ID. So when I click login button, I have to authenticate, obviously. Here is my account, so I will select it, and I have to provide one-time passcode. So obviously I have to check my email. So let me do it right now. And once I receive the code, I have to provide this code here. So let me do it really quickly. Okay, 52. And I'm signing in. And once I'm successfully authenticated, as you can see, I can access the portal. However, important thing is that on the left side, you can see that here is my patient ID displayed. And this information is taken from the ID token that was issued to the application by Microsoft Entra External ID. And this patient identifier is taken from the external system, from the database. And this is where token enrichment API or custom authentication extensions feature on Entra External ID can be really helpful, because we have this possibility to include custom claims in the ID and access tokens, so application can utilize it. So in this case, my patient ID is displayed here, and of course I can start using the application. So right now, let's see what's going on the Entra External ID side. So first of all, we have to configure custom authentication extension on Entra side. So under custom authentication extensions tab, as you can see, I configured this get patient identifier. And this is the configuration for my token enrichment API. Basically, under this tab, I can configure where Entra will send the request during user authentication for a specific application. Okay? So as you can see here, the target URL is my Azure function URL, but as I mentioned, it can be any other hosting platform. It can be Azure Web App, it can be Azure Container App, and anything else like Logic App. The important fact is that when Entra will communicate with this function app, obviously Entra will have to include access token that then will be validated on the Azure function side. So this communication is secure. So in this case, it's not like this API is open and anyone can use it. Nothing like this. There is a strong security applied, so access token is validated, and then Entra can grab some data from the external systems. Once we have this get patient identifier custom extension, we have to also tell Entra that we want to include the claims return from this token enrichment API or custom extension, correct? So under enterprise applications, we have to basically select our application that we will use. So in this case, it's CIAM demo application, which is Formula Healthcare demo application. And under single sign-on tab, I will have to precisely say which claims I want to include and which custom authentication extension I want to use. So under attributes and claims, I'm clicking edit button, and you will see that here, of course, I have some additional claims that can be returned, but here is the most important claim, patient identifier. So in this case, if I click it, you can see that the source attribute is custom claims provider.patient identifier. So this claim will be included in the resulting ID and access token. And obviously, as you can see under custom claims provider, I selected get patient identifier. So just to summarize, when user will be authenticating in our Formula Healthcare demo, which is registered here in Entra, Entra will use custom claims provider, which is called get patient identifier. Entra will call external API and will grab some additional claims, including patient identifier, and this patient identifier will be included in the ID token used by the application. So that's why we saw this patient identifier on the left side in the web application. Okay, perfect. So let's really quickly look at the source code of the token enrichment API in the External Identities Hub Architecture. So here is the source code of the External Identities Hub Architecture, and under Token Enrichment API there is Token Enrichment Controller, and we have this dedicated endpoint to process requests from Microsoft Entra External ID. Okay, so during user authentication, this endpoint is called. And basically, if we go to the data or the data transport object, we can see that Entra will send this request in a specific format with specific properties. Yes, there will be data, authentication context, correlation ID, and so on. And when we open the token enrichment service, which is responsible for processing this request, as you can see here, we need this correlation ID to be sent back to Entra. So basically, we have to grab it from the request and include it in the response. But also here, we can include additional claims. Here is the example how to include custom roles in the ID or access token. So like include the administrator role, but obviously in the same way, patient identifier is included. So when our external token enrichment API is called, we can grab patient identifier, include it in the token enrichment data, and obviously return this response to the Entra External ID for customers. And then Entra, as we saw in the portal, can grab this custom claim and include it in the token. So this is basically it about token enrichment API. It's really powerful. It can be really helpful, especially in scenarios where we need to include some claims from external systems in the tokens issued to our applications. Okay, perfect. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, let's be in touch. You can reach out to me using either the email that is displayed currently on this slide or using LinkedIn. And I strongly encourage you to watch the first video where I do the overview of Formula 5's External Identities Hub Architecture. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.